I was never in better form, to be honest with you. It's the 1st of July. I had a bad cold when I came back from Birmingham and I thought I had COVID. I was worried about myself for a while, but I'm all right. And now I'm back in Donegal and I'm doing a podcast for you for the 1st of July. And I thought I'd read a little bit to start with from What is Beautiful in the Sky. It came out 2 years ago. I wrote it 2 years ago in the first lockdown, and I mentioned Tom McIntyre in it. I read this piece during the week at a lovely event in Boyle, in King House in Boyle, and there's a musical ensemble, a quartet called the Ivlana Quartet, and they were playing classical music, and I was interspersing a few readings, and these are the readings that I chose. So I thought, to make a nice podcast if I was to read some of them. And there's a good reason for doing this as well, that in some sense the book is about this time of year. So I talk about McIntyre, and the reason I selected this piece was because the musical group Ivlana, they played a thing called the O'Carolan Suite, which is kind of a medley of a fresh arrangement of different tunes by O'Carolan. It was very beautiful. And O'Carolan was a South Ulster poet, and in some sense I think that Tom McIntyre, who was, born around 1930 and he died 2 years ago, but in some sense he was in the lineage of the South Ulster poets, bardic poets. He wrote in English, but there was something about McIntyre's writing was, it was kind of the core energy, and it was very Gaelic and very rooted in the whole imagination of Gaelic culture, South Ulster. And for me, he was a great mentor, and rather than sort of explaining him and then reading stuff, I'll read you the stuff first. McIntyre couldn't drive. Cars or vans meant nothing to him, but he knew an enormous amount about sonnets and Irish syllabic verse, and I loved his poetry, and I treated him like a teacher, like a father and a master, and over the years, whenever I sat at his table, I eased more and more into the rituals of food, the dance of good conversation, where you don't speak of your own work, and how to experience the pleasure of wine rather than guzzling it simply to relieve anxiety. He lived a long lifetime, and he picked blackberries along the ditches in the morning when he was in his 80s. And sometimes, when I took off in the car to travel across 2 counties into the drumlins of East Cavan to visit him, it felt like the most radical thing I had ever done. And sometimes just being with him for a night at the fire seemed endless as we worked our way down a bottle of whiskey. I would drive home the following morning as if it was the beginning of a new life, and my head singing with phrases he had used in the shadows at the fireside. Walk over the cliff blindfolded, he would urge me over and over again, and do it every day without fail. What he meant by that walk, it was a great phrase of his, and I'm departing from the text here, but just imagine walking over a cliff. That's a kind of a very foolish thing to do, a very reckless thing to do. And he meant that was a way to live life. To always take the risk. And the reason that he was a mentor to me was because on 2 critical occasions in my life, when I felt like taking a risk, he encouraged me to take it. He didn't encourage me to be safe or cautious. And funny enough, the first time was when I was a teacher in West Cavan, and he advised, no, he didn't advise me now, but I would have shared with him the notion that I might like to go back to Maynooth and study theology. And I didn't know what to do, given up my safe job as a teacher, my permanent and pensionable job. It was 1974 or 75. And he would have said, risk it. Do what you really feel you want to do. Follow your heart. Don't be cautious and don't be safe. And for that reason, he was one of those. He wasn't advising me, but I could see that the thing he was saying was, in his own words, walk over the cliff. Take the risk. And it was somebody else said to me one time, you'll never regret what you did. You'll regret what you didn't do. I'm writing a book at the moment, and it's a collection of letters to people, some of whom are dead, some of whom were people I loved, but I never told them that before they died. In other words, there were people that I had a friendship with, and then the friendship sort of fizzled out, and I wasn't in contact with them for a long time. And I would feel, sometimes they'd come into my mind, and I'd think, I should write there to Joe or to Pat or to Tom. I should write to them and just give them a bit of encouragement, or say we should meet and, go and have an evening with them, or connect with them, or just tell them I loved them. Just thank them for all the good they did for you in your life. Something like that, And quite a number of people, I never did it until they died. And then suddenly they're dead, and they're going to be dead forever. There's no more listening to music or dancing or reading laptops. It's all over. Somebody else will get your laptop. Somebody else will get your car. Everything, it's gone. It's not yours any longer legally, because you're gone, you're dead. And there's no coming back. Your eyelids will not open again. You'll not look at a sunset again. You'll not hear music. You'll not hear magpies in the middle of the night. It's all over. And that's a pretty scary kind of idea, the finality of death. And so if there's somebody there that, there's loose ends between me and them, and there's things I should say to them, like thank you, or to reassure them of how I was, how I loved them, or how they mattered to me, or just friendships, that somebody that you just appreciate because they did so much good to you, and you're not saying it to them, and you haven't seen them for 3 or 4 years. And well, watch out, because death comes unexpected, even in old age. We never really expect it, and then it's over. And now, for certain people that I loved, and that I would so wish to be able to sit here and look at them and say, Tom, Pat, Joe, whoever, you were such a good friend to me, and I really appreciated it all those years ago or whatever, and I never did. I can't say it now because it's over. I'm writing a book at the moment which is about that, and it'll be coming out in the autumn, and I hope you keep your eye out for it. And it's called All the Things That Are Left Unsaid. The things we don't say. Well, that's what I think you regret. The things you didn't do, and the things you didn't say lovingly to people. And you won't regret the dangerous things you did. I feel that when you risk something, you're actually risking part of the bit of yourself that is, it'd be good to shatter it. It's called the ego, the safe bit. The bit that kind of sits there in a ball at the fire and says, this is me, and I preserve everything that I have, and, I want to hold on to all the little things that I like, because I'm me. And in some way when you risk something, when you could be a small thing, you could be sitting in the room on your own and you don't feel like going downtown and you feel, well, I go downtown, I'll meet people, I don't want to be talking to them, it's going to threaten me, I'm going to feel like, oh, risk it, go do it. Go out from yourself. Go out from yourself. I'm going, for example, to Glencollamkill to an Irish language course tomorrow. That's July the 2nd. And I don't want to go. I mean, I've been talking about going for 15 years, maybe longer. I've been talking about going to do an Irish language course to see could I brush up some of the Irish I used to have when I was a young fella. And I've never done it. And all of a sudden this year, because I'm hanging around places like Ranafast, I thought I'll definitely do it this year. And I booked for it and I organised the whole thing. I'm going tomorrow. I'm fierce excited. And now what? I don't want to go. I don't want to go because I'm happy here in my little room. I'm happy here in my little house. I'm happy here in my little studio and the bedroom and the television and all the little things that make me feel cosy. Right? What do I want to be going down to Glencollamkill to talk to strangers in Irish? Oh, no. So the bit that, the bit that we don't want to change, that we want to hold on to, sometimes that's the very bit, it would be good to shatter it. Dragging ourselves out of our comfort zone and just kind of letting go of the ego a little bit and going out and forgetting yourself and thinking about somebody else. And it's also amazing how when you start thinking about somebody else, you stop thinking about yourself. And if there's one trap you get into in relation to depression, it's where the depression is in a loop of the voice in your head that's being negative, and it's like a tormenting demon, and it's just, like a voice actually talking to you in your head all the time, telling you tyrannically how bad you are as a person. And then when that voice stops, your own voice comes out, and your own voice does the same thing. It's sort of, you go on like, I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to go out, and it goes round in a circle, this sense of, a negative voice inside you, and yet at the same time, you don't want to leave yourself. You want to sit there listening to it. You don't want to listen to anything else. You don't want to listen to other people. And it's a real sign of depression too, and I'm saying this in my own experience, but it used to be for me a real sign of depression when I'd be sitting listening to somebody and I couldn't hear a word they were saying. I'd be there pretending I was listening, but the voice in me head would be saying, you're not listening to them. And of course, as long as I was hearing the voice that said, you're not listening to them, I wasn't listening to them. And then there'd be a silence and the other person would say to me, what do you think? And I wouldn't know what they're talking about because I wasn't listening. And they'd know I was depressed. You get stuck in yourself. So, in a way, it's like going out from that. It's going out from your ego. Taking the risk. And for me, it worked in life. So, you might be younger. You might have a whole big, huge future of a life ahead of you. And if you do, well, one way of putting it is, follow your heart. And I think that's a good way to put it too. There was times in life I didn't follow my heart. I followed my brain and my rational mind, and I always then ended up having to rewind. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you do the rational, logical thing rather than the thing that makes you happy. But eventually, when you're far enough down that road of doing the rational, sensible thing, you'll get more and more unhappy, and eventually you'll have to drag yourself back. Reverse. And do what your heart wants to do. So it's always better to do it in the beginning. Do what your heart wants to do in the beginning. And also, I suppose to trust your heart, because I think for me that is a link with faith. You know, the Sufis have a great thing about, yearning for God, but then God comes so that you eventually say God is present. And to say God is present is that you are not present. That your ego, that whole infrastructure of neurosis that wants to cling to everything that's safe and wants to sit by the fire and wants to stay in the bed and wants to not engage with other people, and just be kind of like yourself with yourself, and obsessed with yourself, so that you're having a dialogue with yourself. Now, how do you get out of that? Well, you get out of it. One way is to take the risk of following your heart. And then you forget about yourself, you'd be like John of the Cross. I went out from myself, go out and forget yourself. And the other way, of course, is prayer, where you forget yourself by going further inside. And the way you do that is by meditation or mindfulness, whatever, but single-pointed concentration. It's about again, letting all those voices of neurosis in you go silent. You use a mantra, for example, and you say the mantra, or you say the rosary. Jesus prayer in the Orthodox tradition, different ways to do it, but they're all the same. They're all using a mantra, a rhythm, like the rhythm of the sea, repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. And so you keep pulling your mind into this focus, into this central rhythm, this central repetitive thing. And the more you do it, the longer you do it. You do it like 10 minutes every day, you do it regularly. You develop a muscle, a discipline that your mind is actually able to do it. And of course what's happening is if you fill your conscious mind with this single mantra, Allah, in Islam, Allah, Mani Padma Hum, in Buddhist tradition, Lord Jesus, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, Christian tradition. Do that like a mantra, over and over and over again. 10 minutes, let's say. It fills the space of your conscious mind, and it kind of pushes away all the negative voices, all the tormenting demons that afflict you, that try to tell you you're a bad person and you're doing everything wrong. Just a mantra can liberate you from those demons. So that's a very powerful, and that's like going inside. That's finding, that God, as they say in Islam, is closer to you than your own jugular vein. That you are not an individual within the universe, but that you are God's presence manifested in the universe yourself. Rest of your life. And again, remember that you pass away. I've had close friends who pass away and they're lying in the coffin and their eyes are closed, and I'm looking at their eyelids and I'm looking at their eyebrows, and I'm thinking, this is a particular fella now I'm thinking of that I loved very much, And there he is in his coffin, and I'm looking at those eyes like they're the same eyes so many evenings we laughed, and he'd smile, and we'd have another little whiskey or a little bit of a chat or a walk on the beach or whatever. And he was my, like my brother, in the sense of, the big way of using that word brother, and camaraderie, friendship. And there you go. He's in a coffin. And it's a shock. It's not a shock sometimes, I think, to see a stranger in a coffin, but to it's sometimes even not a shock to see a parent, because they are older than you, and you feel, well, they're on the cusp, on the threshold of eternal life. They go ahead of us. So it's a natural thing that a young person understands from an early age. Your parents will pass away, and you'll be there with them to say farewell. Okay, but it's when friends start to pass away, friends that you've had really good times with, and that you don't see them as older than you, just dear friends. And for me, on a number of occasions, I would say in the past 4 or 5 years, I'm standing there looking at the coffin. And I'm looking at the actual details of a closed eyelid, and thinking, he can never open that eye again. He can never look. Because I remember him looking, I remember him smiling. I remember him, the two of us together, staying up all night, and then it's dawn. The way in this time of year you see the night sky never goes completely dark, and the sun is crossing the north, and you can see the beautiful pallid colours, and sometimes red in the sky, as there was last night, as it's moving across into the dawn. And then we go for a walk. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and we're walking, we've sobered up, and we're just enjoying being alive, we're enjoying our friendship. We're standing by the lake shore, and we're listening to the early sounds that you'll get at that hour of the morning, where the fish are jumping, because there's nothing else in the cosmos close to them that's going to disturb them. There's no cars, there's no people, there's no boats. It's all just natural, and the fish are coming up, and you can hear them plop, plop. And there's the two of us, me and my friend. And he's smiling, and he's looking into the sky, he's looking at the beautiful colour of the water. And then, sometime later, just like actually a couple of years ago, I'm standing in a room, and I'm looking at him in his coffin, and it's those same eyes. Eyelids closed, serenity on the face, and yet they can never. And that's a big, long meditation on death, and I'm glad to share it with you, because I feel so deeply that if we meditate on death, it impels us into living the present moment more joyfully and more gratefully. And I suppose, again, particularly more gratefully, because how can I thank God for my consciousness? Like, I didn't make myself, and yet I'm here. I didn't plan this beforehand, and yet it's happening. I'm living this moment. I live many more moments, but they're finite. And now everyone becomes more precious. Every second becomes more precious, because they're finite. And they're beautiful. And they're extraordinary. And all I want to do is to sort of maybe thank my mother and father, thank my mother for allowing me to be born in her womb, thank my father for, being there, making the effort, physically and emotionally, so that I was able to get born. And to thank my teachers and my family, my siblings, everybody around me. Everybody who sheltered me. And I think of people who lived in other times who were really suffering, being attacked and chased by wild animals, and look at the comfortable life I have. And I think of the huge amounts of people in the world at this very moment who are struggling just to survive, who have to spend like every hour of the day in slavery. It's the only word you could use for some of the appalling conditions that people in the world have to live in a kind of a slavery, in order to earn a little bit of food to get them just through 24 hours. The level of people living on the edge of survival is a shame to me, and must disturb me, even as well as me feeling all this bliss and all this wonderful joy that I'm alive. Must be a sense that what am I doing for people who are really suffering? And again, when I go through the scorecard in my life, I come out fairly low on everything. And that's not a false modesty. But I also feel forgiven. I also feel that there's a sense that if I could do better tomorrow, like maybe tomorrow, because of this podcast, I will make a dedicated contribution of €5 to some genuine, serious charity that's working somewhere in the world in a really good way with people who are afflicted. Maybe I'll just give that pittance, that tiny little €5. And you'd say maybe, well, that's very small, but okay, it's small, but maybe that would lead to something else. Maybe that would be like one drip that would lead to a bigger drip and a bigger drip. Don't chastise yourself for making an act of generosity which is very small, because the truth is, a little act of generosity, if you put out a penny, €1, $1 today, and you do it online, you can do it online. You do something like that, there's every likelihood that you might do it again tomorrow. There's every likelihood that you will become more generous the more you do those little acts of generosity. And my teacher used to say to me, Rinpoche, he'd say, the 6 perfections, one of them is generosity. In Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. But he used to say, don't give too much, because you can kind of get high and emotional and get carried away, and you give too much and then you regret it. And you're regretting giving the money or the gift or whatever it is, then it becomes negative. You go sour. And you can see a lot of that all over the shop, all over the world. People, they get over enthusiastic and they give, like, let's say the son, and look, he's stuck, I'll give him $5,000, and they give the son this huge amount of money, and then 2 years later the son behaves in a way that the father thinks wasn't, properly acknowledging daddy, and he begins to get resentful. He starts thinking, well, not after all I did for you and all that money I gave you. He's now resentful. He's now feeling toxic and negative because of what he gave away as an act of generosity. So my teacher used to say, don't be overdoing generosity. Make sure your generosity is within your capabilities. And then you'll do it again and again. And if you do it again and again, you create a kind of a karmic pattern that you will build up, and you will become more generous. Now, all those things come back to Tom McIntyre's phrase, walk over the cliff. To follow your heart in life, and not to be huddled in some little careful, safe place. That's what you will regret. The fact that you didn't go out and risk more. And there's two stories in the Christian Gospels I'll refer to because to connect with that. One is the obvious one about, the guy, the servant who had 2 talents. He got these 2 talents, these 2 gifts from the master, and he went away and he buried them to keep them safe. And the other guy got 5 talents, let's say. And he went out and he kind of used his talents to generate more talents. And so when the master came back, he said, what did you do with the things I gave you? And the first fellow said, oh, well, I kept them safe. There they are. But the other fellow risked what he had got, and then he made more. He enriched himself further by taking the risks. Now, the other one in the Jesus story that I was thinking of is not in the Gospel, but it's just in the history. It's in the Acts of the Apostles. And that is, of course, the time when Jesus died and the resurrection happened, something that was experienced by Mary Magdalene. And where were the boys? Huddled in the upper room, probably still suffering from hangovers, but they weren't coming out, They were staying safe, they were staying underground, they were staying out of the limelight. They didn't want to be, risking themselves at a time when the Romans had just executed Jesus. And then the Holy Spirit comes, whatever that means, and they're filled with this sense of wisdom and courage. And then they go out, and then they risk everything. And then, of course, they build up the whole church. So staying safe, protecting yourself, that could be what you'd regret. But going out to other people, engaging with other people, risking things to follow your heart, to go and connect with people you love. Go and connect with people that maybe you have forgotten about. Maybe you have neglected them. So take a risk and reach out to them. And tell them how you feel. And also be grateful. Feel this wonderful gratefulness just that you're alive. Because, as they say in the country, you'll be long enough dead. I'm going to go back now and finish the story that I started about Tom McIntyre. And honest to goodness, I hope you have a really, really good time, a really good time this month. This is the month of July, and it's going to be a beautiful month, right? And it's a summer month. And even if it's raining in Ireland, it's not raining everywhere. But even if it's raining in Ireland, the days are long. There's a brightness in the sky in the morning that goes on until 10 o'clock at night still, you know. It's so wonderful. And be out there and enjoy it. And reach out to other people. Follow your heart. So, I was talking about these times when Tom McIntyre was alive, and I would, drive home from spending the evening with him. He had a house by the lake, by Loch Sheelin at the time. He was living on his own at the time. And he had a house near Loch Sheelin, and we'd stay there. And we'd drink whiskey. He'd cook a meal, and I'd enjoyed the meal with him, and then we'd maybe have a whiskey at the fire. And he'd give me, a place to stay for the night. And because I was taking the drink, I wasn't going to drive home. The following morning, then I'd be driving home. And I'd always feel it was nearly like the beginning of a new life. Me head singing with phrases that he had used in the shadows at the fireside. Walk over the cliff blindfolded, he'd urge me, over and over again, and do it without fail every day. I used to think if only he had lived in a world where the Irish language was as fluently spoken as Arabic in the lands of Rumi. Like Rumi spoke Arabic, and Rumi was a poet of enormous energy talking about love, and there was McIntyre, and he was kind of like an Irish version of that. He was like coming in the tradition of the bardic poets of South Ulster. But he was doing it in English, which was to some extent a problem. I feel that he would have been people would have heard him more if he had been writing in Irish, if Irish was the full kind of natural vernacular of the people in Ireland. He was forced to sing in the English language, and that illustrated his originality, and at the same time it kept him hidden. Perhaps that's the same old blockage for anyone Irish who writes in English. And sometimes I think that even Arabic might be a better choice. What I'm saying there, I suppose, is that when I read Rumi, the Persian poet, you're reading him in translation. Or when I read Neruda, Pablo Neruda, you're reading them in translation, but you can see that they're singing the song of love. And English seems to me so polluted with rationalism, with logic, with modernity. It's almost impossible to feel the intimacy of what the poet is putting before you. Remember, I'm not sure what wonderful, I think it was Ian Foster, somebody maybe said, that defining what poetry is, he said poetry is what is lost in translation. If you take a poem, a love poem, let's say by Neruda, a love poem by Rumi, you translate it into English, you read the English, you can feel indirectly the energy in the poem. But only if you heard the poem in its original language do you get the full sensual intimacy of what the poet is saying. So with McIntyre, he was a great love poet, and I think it made sense in the Irish language if he had been speaking Irish. If you listen to Irish singing, if you listen to beautiful love songs in Irish, or laments, Eileen O'Roon, I won't name any others, but you know what I mean. Listen to them, and the words, the meaning in the words, and the sensual sound of the words, they're all the one experience. They're all one single experience. And when you hear something that's translated from Irish into English, you're missing something. And so I used to always think that about MacIntyre, that he was an Irish language poet, even though he was writing English. And that left there was an intimacy in his work that would have come out stronger if he was a native Irish speaker and we were able to listen to him in Irish. The sacramental energy in Gaelic, in the Irish language, seems to me to be far stronger than it is in English. Seems to me that in English, language has been polluted by a sense of the rational and a sense of modernity. It's very hard to feel the full sensual passion of love poetry in English. You get irony in English, but in Spanish or in Arabic or in Irish, you get a kind of an intimate, whispered, sensual truth in the love poem. I'll never forget the night that MacIntyre first lifted a book by Rumi off his shelf in my presence and said, "I have something here for you." And his hand was trembling. There were notes written on every page. He read a few lines and then, from memory, began to fill the room with beautiful thoughts from the great Sufi poet. The book was The Glance by Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, and on the opening page MacIntyre had written, "I learn by going where I have to go." Learn by going where I have to go. There's a sense of obligation. There's certain places you have to go. There's certain things you must do. Not because they're easy, but must be done. And that's how you learn. I had not yet learned anything about Rumi or his ecstatic verses, in which his mystical love for the beloved becomes a symbol of his love for God. And both MacIntyre and I were born into an Ireland where words minted in the age of faith were meaningless. So codes were required in a secular time to mark the same territory, to find the path without the help of the usual signposts. The book was more than a book. The many sentences he had underlined were more than just the tracks and traces of his reflections. It was for me a moment of intense intimacy. He was passing to me something that could not be named, exposing me to the tenderest aspect of his own uncertainty. "Read it," he said, again becoming a Zen master, becoming the one with authority. And I did. I read it many times, following fresh and deeper signposts. I read it late into the nights when I was stricken with depression, and in moments of elation, hand in hand with my own beloved, on beaches in Donegal and on the streets of Warsaw. "Will you meet me on the inside or on the outside?" I often asked her late at night. But I was only quoting Rumi. "Will you meet me on the inside or on the outside?" I often whispered in the dark on many nights when there was no one else in the room. But of course I've always loved the night. I was in Paris 20 years ago on the occasion of the Nuit Blanche. I hadn't a clue what was going on. I wandered around the old student quarter near Rue des Irlandais, confused at first by the lights in every shop and the crowds on the streets, though it was after midnight. In the lit-up city, restless lovers wandered along the boulevards, and young people queued for crepes at the corner of every street. Along the Seine, big glass buildings had been transformed into television screens. The facades of a train station flickered with the giant projection of Humphrey Bogart. Near pavement cafes, the air was heavy with perfume, the aroma of coffee and cigarette smoke. There were enough lights blazing to attract E.T. back to Earth. Museums were open, and in various little galleries, Parisians admired the art. "All the galleries are open," I exclaimed to a waitress in a bar near the Pantheon. "Even Notre Dame is open. It's amazing." She had long hair and huge brown eyes, and a tiny white apron around her waist. There were photographs of Sartre and Camus on the walls. The bare floorboards and the red upholstery on the seats looked like they hadn't been changed since the days when Nazi officers strutted about the Luxembourg Gardens. Ireland wasn't overrun by Nazis, but in those years little Ireland was smothering beneath De Valera's musty overcoat, and it took a very long time to escape. I tried to explain to the waitress that, despite centuries of repression, we were also a cultured people. I tried to explain to her that in our country we also stay up late, singing and playing music. Even in winter, when the wind from Fermanagh roars over the rushy beards of Quilca Mountain, we huddle at the kitchen range, reciting poetry and quarrelling about metaphysical issues until dawn, says I. She zigzagged between the tables with plates of food, and she served me a stew of boiled cabbage and bacon, which I washed down with 2 bottles of wine. I couldn't keep my eyes off her, and we chatted in English whenever she passed my table. I saw a musician place his fiddle case on the bonnet of a Volvo one night, I said to her, in the middle of Tubbercurry, and he took out his instrument and played a slow air just to welcome the dawn. Irish people drink too much, she joked. And long ago at Christmas time, the mountains glowed as people walked down the slopes to midnight mass, with lanterns and torches in their hands, says I. What are you talking about? She wondered. Nuit Blanche, I replied. We don't keep all the lights on, but we have our own kind of Nuit Blanche in Ireland. We make poetry in the dark. We sing songs in the dark. We play pianos and dance in the dark and make violins talk, such things that would soften the heart of a prison guard. You talk too much, she said. You need to relax. Lighten up. Nuit Blanche is just for fun. But if you wait until I finish work, I can take you to my studio. I am an artist. We walked through the city past the Pompidou Centre, where a friend of ours was distributing anti-nuclear leaflets, and a boy from Clare was playing a didgeridoo. The 4 of us went back to her studio. There were unfinished paintings on the floor, and white canvases leaning against the walls, and a bare bulb near the ceiling. The Clare boy and the anti-nuclear woman went to bed, a vast mattress on the corner, a boy's paradise of black ribbon and soft lace. I sang Raglan Road, in a cloud of patchouli, amid scented candles and the tang of linseed oil. "Lovers should stay up all night," I declared. "Au contraire," she replied, "if we were lovers, we would go to bed." I was so terrified of committing the literal act of love with her that I dilly-dallied around the subject until 6 a.m. quoting poems by Neruda. "In Ireland, staying up all night is a sort of contraceptive," I admitted, finally. She said, "Paris never sleeps." And we danced a little then, before the flat grey light of morning brought me down to earth, and I bade her farewell and went home. But that was a long time ago, before I grew too old for dancing. MacIntyre, he was like a mother sometimes, not just with young women or people sick in hospital, but even with me. He cooked me fish and sheltered me in his house and put his arms around me. In a big soft jumper I felt I was being cherished. When he died in Samhain, November of 2019, and when the funeral was over, I didn't know what to do. So I wrote him a letter, and this is it. "Dear Tom, I went to your house last night. I was there before. On an autumn day, when you were watching Donegal play in the Ulster final, and the cat sat on top of the sofa looking down at us, and your beloved carried soup from the kitchen, and the smell wafted along the corridor. And I was there 1 year later, when you grew feeble, went into the woods of your own imagination, sat at the table staring at a poem, until finally you were confined to the pillow, your face fallen into the quiet repose of a pilgrim. You were my oak tree, withering slowly, gracefully. You were my compass, my mountain, my river. But last night your house was empty. I saw the casket of wicker. I saw the gaunt bones stretched in a suit. I saw the people gathered. But the house was empty. The poet was no more. And then on the way home I remembered your voice, telling that old story about the trap door you fell through as a child. There was a trap door, this is what Tom told me. There was a trap door at one end of the loft, and nothing would do me but to find it. Even if I didn't know I was searching for it, I rambled my way to it, the foxglove looking at me, the clover smelling, the daisies basking, the buttercups shiny, and the trap door somehow not fastened. I'm gone. 15-foot drop to the stable below, but a lap of hay was waiting for me. It saved me. It wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. And when people ask me what I believe, I invariably say, I believe in a lap of hay. That's what he told me. The letter continues to Tom. Tom, I too believe in angels that catch us when we fall. And it was you who taught me to say my prayers to them. And it was you who taught me that the only story worth telling is a love story. Your house is silent now, and empty. So what could I do this morning but go tell the bees, tell the robin, tell the magpies and badgers, the foxglove and clover, tell the hills and drumlins, the lakes and rivers, the hedgerows of berries, tell them the house is empty. I did. But the bees spoke back to me. The robin replied. No, they said, no. The house is never empty. As long as love lacks surveillance, as long as love is sung, spoken, danced, the house is never empty. Love is everywhere, behind us, above us, below us, beside us, and inside and outside and everywhere. Love is around us. That's where the letter to Tom, that I read at his funeral, that's where it ends. And where I end this evening is to share with you, in summary, because I've been reflecting last week on the art of memoir, and this week trying to just share with you memoir by reading, following the principle to know your world, to tell and bear witness to what happens to you in your life. Say it, speak it. And I had a deep, deep sense this week to share with you the idea of how you risk, like falling over, not falling, but jumping over the cliff, like abandoning yourself is the dynamic that leads to joy. You know, it's in that prayer of the little brothers of Jesus. There were a monastic crowd in the deserts of northern Africa. I forget the name of the fellow who started them, but their prayer is, Father, I abandon myself into your arms. McIntyre's version, jump over the cliff or walk over the cliff blindfolded, is like to do something where you're trusting the universe. His sense of that memory he had that when he was a child he fell 15 foot through a trap door, but he landed in a lap of hay. That sometimes it happens to you even though you don't do it. He used to have another phrase, those who will not be led will be dragged, because life will do it to you. If you don't take the risk, sometimes life will push you over the cliff. But either way, there is nothing to be afraid of, because love is all around us. And that's what a poet sings, the love story. And that's what writing or memoir is all about, the love story. Because that's what is around us, that's what envelops us, and that's why we need always to reach the edge of the cliff and then jump. Take the risk. Follow your heart. Don't be afraid. I'll end up with a samurai story, and this one comes through Rumi as well. Beautiful story, but it's a samurai Japanese story. There's a tsunami coming, and the samurai and his wife are there, and they're looking, and she is absolutely terrified. And he draws his sword, and he turns to her with the sword open, and he points it, and he puts it up to her jugular vein, as if he was about to cut it. And she laughs, and she says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Are you not afraid?" And she says, no, I know you. It's like, stop it. Don't be ridiculous. Stop it. So he says, you're not afraid even though I have a blade to your jugular. Because you know me, because you love me and I love you. You know I love you. Well, I see the tsunami coming. I'm not afraid. And that tsunami might even be death. Whatever way the annihilation comes to the ego, ultimately, if you're being present in the wider space of conscious love, you'll have already left your ego. You'll have already experienced, in renunciation, you'll have experienced death. You'll know where the other landscape is. You know the maps of the inside of your soul. You know that God is closer to you than the jugular vein. And you'll know that the presence of love is bigger than just the ego. And you'll have already gone out from your ego so many times. You'll have already taken so many risks. And death will seem like just one more risk to take with abandon, surrender. Love is everywhere, is here now, because you're here now. And that's the way that love is here now, because you are here and I'm here.